All right. Good evening, everyone. I hope we had a good day, and I welcome every one of us who is present live for today's class. And while we wait for others, I just want to quickly make a quick announcement that we are gradually coming to an end for this semester's online facilitation on this course, NSC 508, Nursing Informatics. And I want to plead that you encourage your colleagues to please download all the resource materials that has been made available, go through them, make out time to read them, listen to the videos, and prepare for your exams. If you have been attending the classes, the class sessions, and you have been reading your materials, both the instructional video as well as the course outline that has been provided, I can guarantee you that there's no way you will fail the exam. So do your part, because the whole essence of this exercise is to reduce massive failure among students. So please help us to help you. Thank you. We'll give 5 minutes of grace for others to join, after which we can commence with today's class. Like I always say every week, that it's important that I see the student I'm facilitating, so kindly please activate on your video. Thank you. Okay, maybe as we are waiting for others to join, for those of us that we are present in class now, are there questions or area of clarification you would like me to explain while we are waiting for others? Or better still, for those of us that we are present now, did you manage to download the instructional video for today's class? It was posted earlier before today. And did you manage to download them and listen to them? If you manage to do that, can I see your electronic end? Just show by your electronic ends if you manage to download the instructional video and read and listen to it. Just show by your electronic end. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Like I said, it's not optional. Okay, all right, Janet, thank you. All right, thank you so much for that effort. Like I said, it's not optional for you, it's compulsory. It's very compulsory because all this will be put together to assess you at the end of the semester. And for those of us who have posted our assignments, thank you so much for attempting it. There is a new assignment that I posted. Like I said, you don't know which of the assignments I'm going to use. So I advise students to do all the assignments and submit them. And a quick reminder is that we should put our assignment in PDF format. Please, after doing it in Word, convert it to PDF before posting it on the page. It's very important. It's to reduce my workload. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we can start the class. It was understandable last week because it was public holiday, but today, let's commence the class while others will join. And so, Janet, you managed to download the instructional video. What is our topic for today? Can you put it on the chat? Adeni Mary, welcome to the class. Okay, application of nursing informatics is what we are discussing today, and we started it last week. Last week, we looked at Unit 1 and Unit 2 under this topic called application of nursing informatics. And like I introduced, thank you, application of nursing informatics, correct. And so I mentioned last week that because it's a broad topic, so we looked at part A last week, which was Unit 1 and Unit 2, and today we'll be concluding the topic by discussing Unit 3 and Unit 4 under it. So Unit 3 is titled Ethical Model for Ethical Decision Making. Ethical Model for Ethical Decision Making. As nurses, we know that ethical model is not something new to us. We have code of ethics known as ethical principles that guides our practices. And so today we are looking at ethics or ethical model in the context of decision making when we are faced with dilemma. And lastly, we will look at Unit 4, which is applying the nursing informatics to nursing administration, nursing practice, nursing research, as well as nursing education. So that is what we would conclude with. So quickly, I'm going to, like I said, for every unit under each of the module has a learning goal. So I will advise that you take note of the learning goal for this class and make sure that you assess yourself if you are able to answer all those questions as set, that is set as learning goal. And so quickly, I'm going to share my slide on the ethical model for ethical decision making. So we looked at it that ethical decision making is the process of making informed choices. The process of making informed choices about ethical dilemmas based on a set of standards differentiating right from wrong. So when we say ethical decision making, it simply means a process of making informed choices about ethical dilemmas based on a set of standards differentiating right from wrong. And we are going to look at individuals' needs based on this following subtopics under ethical model for ethical decision making. To examine the ethical dilemma. When you are faced with ethical dilemma and you need to make a decision, you want to examine the ethical dilemma. That is, you want to see the existing conflicts in the situation. Secondly, you want to thoroughly comprehend the possible alternatives available. Thirdly, you want to hypothesize ethical arguments. What is the best that can happen? What is the worst that can happen if I do this, if I do this? Fourthly, you want to investigate, compare, and evaluate the arguments for each alternative. In every situation, there is always alternative choices. So you want to weigh your argument and look at each of the alternatives that you have. And fifthly, you choose the alternative you would recommend. Six, act on your choosing alternative. That is, when you have made a decision, you want to act on it. You want to take action on the choice that you have made. Lastly, you look at the ethical dilemma and examine the outcomes while reflecting on the ethical decisions. So we'll look at each of these points that I've just mentioned. Applying the ethical model now. What the 7 points that I earlier mentioned are the model, are the ethical model. So we want to look at it in relations to a situation. One is examine the ethical dilemma. What do we mean? In examining the ethical dilemma in a situation, you want to use your problem-solving, decision-making, and critical thinking skills. As nurses, we have these skills, and so you want to apply them in this situation. You want to identify the dilemma and analyze it. What is the dilemma? You have to identify the dilemma as well as analyze it. Collect as much information about the dilemma as you can. You need a lot of information about the situation, the dilemma, in order for you to make sure that relevant facts are clearly identified. You need to identify the dilemma as well as information that can enable you to make an informed decision or choices based on what is right and what is wrong. And you need to ascertain exactly what must be decided. It's very important. You cannot sit in between. You need to make a decision. You need to decide exactly what to do. That is where you need to make a choice now. Who should be involved in the decision-making process for this specific case? When you are faced with dilemma, you need to also think critically, who should be involved in this case? And you involve the person that needs to be involved in the situation you need to make a decision. Who are the interested players or stakeholders? You've got a lot of people you are working with. You need to ask yourself this question: who are the key players? Also reflect on the viewpoints of these key players and their value systems, as well as you think each of these stakeholders would like you to decide as a plan of action for this dilemma. At the end of the day, the stakeholders, your manager, your frontline manager, your supervisor, your chief, would like to know why you make a decision you make, and you need to be able to defend it based on the standard of practice. So we've just looked at examining the ethical dilemma. The next point we want to look at, don't forget, these are models that we are using to look at a scenario now. Thoroughly comprehend the possible alternatives available. You still need to apply the problem-solving, decision-making, and critical thinking skills. You also create a list of possible alternatives. Be creative when developing your alternatives. Be broad in looking at the whole situation. Don't narrow yourself. Be open-minded so that You can have more than one way to reach a goal. There are always more than million or thousand ways of killing a cat. It doesn't have to be one way. So look at different ways of the situation and compel yourself to discern at least 3 alternatives. So you also clarify the alternatives available. What are the available, what are the alternatives that are available for me? You predict the associated consequences. That is the good. What is the best that will happen? Or what is the worst that can happen if I do not do this and that? So you make your choice based on that. The next model is hypothesize ethical arguments. That is, use your problem-solving, decision-making, and critical thinking skills. Determine which of the 5 approaches apply to this dilemma. Identify the moral principles that can be brought into play to support a conclusion, and ascertain whether the approach you generate converging or diverging conclusion about what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. So far we have covered 5 models in what, so far we have covered 5 models in what we just discussed. To examine the ethical dilemma, we also look at thorough comprehending the situation. We also look at hypothesize the situation, and we are now looking at the 5th one now. The 5th one, which is to investigate. You want to investigate the situation. You want to investigate, you want to compare, you want to evaluate the argument for each alternative. And we have 4 points, 4 numbers there from 1 to 4. You see, one says minor significant. You need to investigate and compare and evaluate the argument. Is this argument a minor one? Is it a significant one? Is it a major significant one? Is it an extreme significant one? And so you need to decide on that. And you also compare and contrast the alternative available with the value. As we progress in this class, you will see a case study. I'm still going to bring up a case study where we apply this model and we will see the situation, how it applies. And the 5th one is choose the alternative you will recommend. That is, you make a decision about the best alternative available. And you also remember the golden rules. That is, does your decision treat others as you would want to be treated? Does your decision take into account and reflect an interest in the concerns and welfare of the key players? So all those decisions, all those alternatives, you need to ask yourself when making your decision. And so the 6th one is act on your choosing alternative. Formulate an implementation plan delineating the execution of your decision. Plan should be designed to maximize benefits and minimize the risks. Plan as well into account all of the resources necessary and implement the plan. The last of this model is look at the ethical dilemma and examine the outcomes while reflecting on the ethical decision. Use your problem-solving, decision-making, and critical thinking. Monitor the implementation plan and its outcome. If any information becomes available, the plan must be re-evaluated. It's very important. Then monitor and revise the plan as necessary. So before we demonstrate, analyze a case study, let me see if there is any question from the audience. Are there questions from what we have covered so far, or your contribution, since you've also read the instructional video earlier before this class session? Don't forget, class is still in session, and it's a facilitation, it's not a lecture, and like I always say. So your participation, it's very, very important. So questions and contribution, post your question, feel free to post your question as well as your contribution on the chat. It will be read out. And so we want to demonstrate a case study now. We want to look at a case study and analyze it. So I'm going to share my slide on a case study demonstration based on what we have just covered. A case study is just to help students think through how to apply ethical model. So the essence of this case study is to help students, learners, to think on how to apply this ethical model. Don't forget that the 6 or 7 points that I mentioned are the ethical models that you apply when you are faced with ethical dilemma and you need to make a decision. And students are always challenged to determine their decisions in some cases. So this ethical model would help you to make a decision. And so let's look at this scenario. Here is Nurse Alison, who is in charge of a medical surgical unit. She's expecting a clinical instructor from the local university by 2 p.m. to review and discuss potential patients' assignments for the nursing students' schedule for the following day. However, just as the professor arrived, the nurse had an emergency and she needs to attend to patients that is in crisis. She thought, okay, before I even go further, for those of us who are online, is this an ethical dilemma for Nurse Alison? For those of us that we are live in class, can you put your response on the chat? If the scenario, the case study, the case that I just read to you, is it a dilemma? A professor has an appointment with a nurse, an in-charge nurse. Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Linda. It is a dilemma. Professor is around, she booked an appointment for the nursing students assignments. A patient has crisis, she needs to attend to the patient. What must she do? So let's look at how she handled the situation. I'm glad that we've seen that this is a dilemma and she needs to make a decision and make it very fast. What did she do? Let's see. What she simply did, let me share with you what I have put on the slide. To expedite the student nurse assignment for the day, Nurse Allison gives her electronic medical record access password to the professor. Now, you've seen her decision. She made a decision. What she did, she simply gave her password, a medical record password, to the professor. Remember, the professor is not a staff nurse in the hospital. Though the prof is also a nurse, but from institution, different from where Nurse Allison is working. Now, the decision she made, let's look at it based on the ethical model that we've just itemized, and look at other alternatives that she has if she exhausted all her alternatives before she make a decision. So let's look at the first model, which is examine the ethical dilemma. So we are going to look at it. Nurse Allison made a commitment to meet with the professor to develop student assignment at 2. That is fine. The patient emergency that developed prevented Nurse Allison from living up to that commitment that she has with the professor. Nurse Allison had an obligation to provide patient care during the emergency, and a competing obligation to the professor. So we've seen that she's in a dilemma, which we have established that there is a dilemma now, and she needs to make a decision. What did she do? She simply solved the dilemma of competing obligation by providing an electronic medical record access password to the professor. Now, don't forget, we are examining the ethical dilemma that she found herself and the choice she made. This, by sharing her password, Nurse Allison most likely violate hospital policy related to security of healthcare information. Do you agree with me? She may also have violated the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics, which states that nurses must judiciously protect information of a confidential nature. But because, let's say, because the professor also is a nurse, so she's not diverging any information. So we've seen the points in examining. So we've seen that she made a choice, she made a decision. She's having a conflict obligation, a responsibility to the patient, a responsibility also to the professor because she booked an appointment. So she's obliged to hold the meeting. Unfortunately, there's an emergency. So she simply solved the situation by releasing her password, her medical record, her password. So, but as we progress, we will see what other alternatives she could have used. So don't let me run ahead, because each of the model will explain and looked at other alternatives. So the next model we want to look at is thoroughly comprehend the alternatives that other alternatives. So we looked at it that did she thoroughly comprehend the possible available alternatives. One, Alison could have asked the professor to wait until patient crisis was resolved. In fact, before I even, okay, let's even rub minds together on this. What do you think are the other alternatives that Nurse Alison could have used? Let's put it on the chart. What are other alternatives that she could have used instead of simply releasing a password, a medical record password to the professor? Don't forget, she's not working alone. It's not likely she's working alone. She's working with other nurses. So let's share. Let me share your thoughts on other alternative. I just mentioned one to you because there is no way that the patient crisis will last for the whole day. So I have just given you one that she could have asked the professor to wait. I don't think the professor would have objected to that. That is one alternative. So what is, okay, take permission from the meeting for another time. Yes, that's another option. The professor could book another appointment. Yes, these are other options. But don't forget, in the scenario, I said that the assignment is for the next day. So another appointment for another day might not really work because the students are posted already and the assignment is for the next day. So she needs to have the students' assignments that is scheduled for the next day. But the option of, okay, Alison could have logged on to the system for the professor. Excellent, yes. She could have just logged in and asked the professor to key in the assignment for the student. They can also decide or review online. Okay, those are other options. And don't also forget, she could have also delegated another nurse, another colleague, another staff nurse to attend to the professor. So these are other alternatives, but we can see that she did not exhaust other available alternatives before she make a choice. And so we've looked at that. The next point we want to look at is to hypothesize the alternative that you have. So that's the next model we are going to look in relation to the case I just presented now. So okay. So hypothesize ethical arguments. What are other arguments that she could have asked herself? Does the action respect the moral right of everyone? The principle to consider are autonomy, veracity, and fidelity. And as for the fairness or justice, how fair is Nurse Alison's action? Does our action treat everyone in the same way, or does it show favorism and discrimination? We see that in this case, there is a clear violation of an institutional policy designed to protect the privacy and confidentiality of medical records. However, the professor had a legitimate interest, we will say that, but Nurse Alison trusted that the professor could not use the system password to obtain information other than the agreed assignment. So we've seen that in hypothesizing this case study, we see that the decision she made by releasing a medical record password goes against the institutional policy of confidentiality and security of the institution. So we want to also, that is it. So this is just a scenario. But if you look at it, these are some of the cases or some of the situations that some of us can find ourselves. So applying ethical model, in which is a standard of or principles or rules of practice or making decision, helps us to decide on the worst or the best scenario by identifying the conflict and exhausting all the alternatives that we have. So we looked at model 5. Is it 4 or 5 now? We see now. I think it should be 5. Okay, 3 or 5, we see. Which is investigate, compare, evaluate the argument for each alternative. So you look at this table that I have here. Under this table, we are unpacking or analyzing alternative actions, which under the column I have, she could have asked the professor to wait until the crisis was resolved. That is another option. She could have delegated to another staff nurse member, which we have said, or log onto the system for the professor, which were the points you raised in the chat, which are very good, but she did not utilize other alternatives. We also see that no policy right violation to patient right and safeguard. Yes, no policy violation, but the professor can begin making the assignment. So we've seen all this under each of these alternatives. We've seen the one she could have made, the one that she did not exhaust. So we looked at choosing the alternative you will recommend. Under that, the best immediate solution is to delegate another staff member to assist the professor. So we've seen now that the alternative you will recommend, and I will recommend, is for her to have chosen another staff to assist the professor while she attends to the emergency. And lastly, the action. Nurse Allison could delegate another staff member, just as we mentioned under choice, to assist the professor in making assignment, and look at the ethical dilemma and examine the outcome while reflecting on the ethical decision. So we've just finished Unit 3 of Module 4. That is Unit 3, and we've looked at about 6 or 7 ethical model under it, and I presented a case study of a nurse who is in charge of a medical surgical unit and has a conflicting obligation, and she made a decision. So we've looked at it, we unpacked the case study under each of the model. And so lastly, we want to look at Unit 4. Under Unit 4 is application. That is, you want to apply this ethical model to nursing informatics, as well as nursing administration, nursing practice, nursing education, and nursing research. Let's quickly see the few points that I have to share on that. Okay, I said applying the ethical model for ethical decision making to manage ethical dilemmas in nursing informatics. Is a component, we have the components of ethical informatics as nursing education, nursing administrator or administration, nursing research, as well as clinical nurses. And so holding promises of beneficence, the technology are purported to increase access, improve quality, and increase the cost of care. And so we just go straight to the application now, which is nursing informatics practitioners are bridging components and international panels. We've seen that facing ethical dilemmas on a daily basis and struggling with unique client situation may cause many clinicians to even question the actions that they have. Okay? So we've looked at it that, let me quickly confirm something that's oh, shucks. Okay, so when we say nursing informatics in education, in administration, in research, in education, in all of these components, we see that decision needs to be made. And when decision needs to be made, we need, sometimes you have a conflict obligation in making this decision. And so it's important that we weigh the alternative, we exhaust all the alternatives that we have on this point before we finally make a decision. And so far, based on what we have covered, can I share your thoughts and your question based on what we have covered? Students, what are your thoughts on what we have covered so far? The more you engage in class, the better for you. So when you engage in a discussion, the tendency of forgetting is slim. So I do encourage that you participate. And Janet, you went through the study, you went through the video. I was expecting you to contribute. For those of us that signify that we managed to download our materials and we went through them, I was expecting a more interactive class today. I don't understand the fourth unit. Okay, I just introduced the first unit. We've not really unpack it. I looking at the time. We still have next week, and I decided to stop on unit 3 because we still have next week. So we'll cover unit 4 next week. So today we are going to end on unit 3. So unit 4 will be covered so that we have something to discuss next week. Don't forget, next week is going to be our last session. So it's a short, slide. So we begin with unit 4, then I entertain your questions and you ask me question. Ask me any question. So prepare your question. Next week is a feedback week. So I'll just take like maybe 10 to 15 minutes to address Unit 4. Then we interact. You tell me from Unit 1, from Module 1 to Module 4, you bring out questions from what we have covered so far in this semester. So don't worry, I just introduced Unit 4. We didn't discuss it today, it will be discussed next week by God's grace, same time, same day. So, but so far, did you understand? Did everyone understand Unit 3 that we covered? Okay, if just type understood on the chat if Unit 3 is well understood. All right, I'm seeing your hand, Janet. Please type in your question and let's understood. Okay, so I'm waiting to see your question or your contribution on the chat. Just put it on the chat and let's address it. If any other person asks question or contribution, please kindly put it on the chat. We still have a few minutes. Okay, they can also, okay, understood. Is it only Linda that, Linda Love, she's the only one that understood what we covered today? What happened? The rest of you are not asking questions, and yet you didn't understand. Under Unit 3, okay, I'm saying more understood. Okay. If you understood what we covered today, which is Unit 3 under Module 4, kindly type on the chat, understood. If you don't understand anything, please, you're welcome to clarify. I'm waiting to hear your comment or your question, Janet. Or you want to speak? Let me unmute you so that I've unmuted you. So let's hear your question. Okay, more explanation on the investigate, compare, and evaluate the argument for each alternative. Under that, what we simply do is, just as in the case in the case study that we presented, we looked at it that she has two conflicting obligations, which is appointment with the professor by 2. Professor is on ground. A patient is having crisis. She needs to attend to the patient. At this time, investigate does not mean that she needs the whole day to do the investigation. No, the investigation is a quick thing. What do I need to do? Okay, who takes a priority? Which of this obligation can wait? She figured it out. The professor can wait while I attend to the patients. So these are investigations she's doing in her mind, and she needs to make a decision. She compared, okay, should I ask the professor to wait while I quickly attend to the patient that is having crisis? If the patient, or should I give my medical record, my medical record password to the professor. These are the things she's investigating in her mind. If I do, what will happen? Will the professor betray or do more than the assignment she needs to input on the system? So you are evaluating, you are investigating, you are comparing the options that you have. At the same time, you are evaluating it in terms of which is right, which is not right. And these are arguments that it's occurring in your mind. They are occurring in your mind. It's not something you need to sit down. It's something, it's a dilemma, and you need to make a decision. So the investigation is on in your mind. You're comparing. Remember, we said we have to make a thorough, comprehensive, alternative options or available options. And this is not what you will sit down. Sometimes you need a minute to do all this. So I hope it's clear now. Who else has a question? Is it understood? All right. So any other question or contribution on what we have covered? Don't forget that these are models. They are ethical models that we apply. They are standardized. We apply them when we are faced with ethical dilemma, when there is a conflicting situation and you need to make a decision. And trust me, as nurses, we are faced with this in our routine activities, and we need to make a decision. And so when we make a choice or make a decision based on this model or based on this standard practice or principles, it helps us to avoid unnecessary litigation. And it also saves the institution that we also work with. All right, I think we've come to the end of the class, and please try to do your assignment. If you know any of your colleagues, encourage them. Deliberately, I've not closed the deadline for the assignment because I want as many people as possible to benefit from the scores. I mean the mark. Out of about 1,000 students, you can't imagine that only 11, as of today that I checked, only 11 students have done their assignments. And that's disheartening for me. My joy is not to see any student fail. I want everybody to pass. But remember, you can only help me to help you. So if you don't attend the class session, if you don't do your assignments, if you don't read your resources, I mean, if you don't download the resource materials that has been provided, how do you understood what is being taught for you to be able to answer questions that will come out in the exam? And I said, nothing outside of what we discover, of what we have discussed, will be set in your exam. What you will see in your exam are basically things that we have covered, So please, read your materials and prepare well for your exams, and by God's grace, you will pass. And so if there is no question or contribution, we end the class for today. I hope to see you next week, same time, same day. And don't forget, next week is going to be a feedback. 5 minutes or 10 minutes will be used to present, to discuss Unit 4, which is a very short presentation that we are going to do. Then the remaining 40 minutes will be to interact together from module 1 to module 4. Go through the slides, go through the VLE, download the instructional video, bring out your question, set question for yourself and ask, and bring it in class. Let's discuss it. And in preparation for your exam anyway. All right, thank you. See you next week, same time, same day. Have a wonderful evening. God bless. Bye.